music? China? What are they even saying? What is this Chinese rap music? Sounds like they're just saying ching chang chong.
My chance new girl watch made in China. We play ping pong ball made in China.
Hello and welcome to China Econ Talk. Uniforms from the podcasting game? A pipe dream for China Econ Talk, but not perhaps if I was the owner of an audio platform here in mainland China. Companies like Himalaya and Youdao have tens of millions of daily users and multi-billion-dollar valuations. So what are the main differences between the Western and Chinese podcast ecosystems? And what shows should I be listening to right now in Mandarin? Yang Yi was a senior editor at Yicai China and a podcast host in his own right, and has just left his full-time job to start a Gimlet-inspired venture here in China. Yang Yi, welcome to China Econ Talk.
Hi, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
So how did you first get interested in audio, radio, podcasting in general?
Well, actually, I'm a longtime radio fan. I listen to the radio receiver, the FM or AM radio. And of course, in China, we have a word called Touting Ditai. You listen to the radio station overseas, like the Voice of America or BBC World Service, that I'm one of them.
Sure.
Yeah. When I was a child, I have a habit to listen to radio. So I have a really long time personal history about audio, but about podcasting, I think it's just during my college.
So what were the sort of shows that were on the air back when you were a kid? You're how old now?
Actually, the first time to listen to radio is very small, maybe 3 or 4 years old. But
Sure.
I remember my first time to listen to the Voice of America or BBC Chinese service is around 9 or 10 years old. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, of course, I could receive some information I never heard in China before, but that's not a point. I truly have a deep impression is about the format of the show.
Interesting.
Yeah, I remember there is an English teaching program from VOA. It's called English Cafe, I remember. So they just want to show how American people talk in a cafe. So so I could hear a background in a cafe, and there's two guys that talk to each other, and there is a host that will tell you, what's the key words in their conversation. I remember that feeling. I just sit in the cafe, and there's just two guys just sitting next to me. So I remember that feeling. So I think, the radio program could do like that. Yeah.
Sure. I remember having a similar experience. The NPR station I grew up in, they had an hour or maybe 2 hours a night of BBC World Service.
Yeah.
And just hearing the different accents and the reporting from all around the world, I was like, wow, I'm traveling just by sitting in the bath listening to this stuff. It was a really cool experience and something special about radio, I think, where it can just transport you like that.
Yeah.
So what would the VOA shows in contrast to what you were listening on domestic Chinese radio? What was going on from an industry perspective, and how did that lead down to the types of shows that were going on broadcast?
In China, I think the radio station usually, their format is usually like the local radio station in America, not the public radio. It's like a commercial radio station in America. So there's a lot of the call-in show, or there's two hosts who will chit-chat or play some music. The world news in the Chinese radio station, usually they just announcer read the manuscript. We use some clips is recorded from the television.
Sure.
So that's totally different from, it's audio only reporter. It's a different feeling. So there is the reason behind that, because after the Cultural Revolution, China's radio station need to reform like everyone else do. In the middle 1980s, so there is a radio station called Zhujiang Jingji Guangbo Diantai, the Pearl River Economic Radio Station. It's close to Hong Kong. So this is the first radio station use a format the Chinese radio station never used before. It's live broadcasting, because before that, every show is recorded, and the announcer or anchor will just read the manuscript. They learn from Hong Kong's radio station and learn the live broadcasting format and call in, let audience have an opportunity to participate into the show. Sure. Or they will have, every show has a 2 to 3 hour slot, and the hosts could manage the different, like news bulletin, the music, the traffic, the weather, very flexible. So that is the first time in China the radio station who use this kind of things to arrange their schedule, arrange their programs. So at that time, it's some kind of innovation in China. Since mid-90s to mid-1990s, the reform go deeper and deeper. So now in China, even average radio station is state-owned, but actually it's a business radio station because they need to earn money. They turn to the commercial advertise for funding instead of the government funding. So they need to take the responsibility for the money. So they will find the Zhujiang model, the Zhujiang Pearl River radio station is a very easy way for there to learn because every radio station just need to cover the whole salary. This very low budget, but the advertisement is very high.
Sure.
For a commercial radio station, I think it's perfect for them. But in my opinion, it has a big impact or influence to the whole Chinese audio industry. I think there's no professional audio producers now. So people don't know how to produce the show like storytelling because, the storytelling show is complicated.
Sure. There was a movie that came out in 2016, 从你的全世界路过, which I think was like a great little window into what commercial radio is like. There's these like two hosts and they broke up and they're in love, but basically they're competing for rating and they have call-in shows and people are, telling them their love stories or whatever. But, as you were saying, there's no on-the-ground reporting. It's just one person and a microphone, which is very cheap, which is also, what the vast majority of American radio is, where there's one or two hosts doing like Rush Limbaugh style or talking sports or just hosting gossip news and music. But what's different is in the US and UK at least is you have the BBC and you have NPR and all of its affiliate stations, which have a ton of money from the public as well as from the donations to invest in this sort of storytelling and reporting. And as followers of the Western podcast ecosystem all know, many of the best and brightest from the Western podcast ecosystem grew out of or were trained by people who first made their marks in public radio.
Yeah, because just like you mentioned before, BBC has a radio too. It's a pop music radio station. It have a very high salary host like the Chris Evans. The Chris Evans show is it's a long time 2-hour breakfast show and just play music. So it's fine because it also has a BBC Radio 4 and a BBC World Service. So these two national or international channel will provide an opportunity for high quality audio production. But, in China, we didn't have this opportunity. Every show is just like call in, chit chat, play music. And, in late night, we have a show is about about the people's relations. Just like, I remember there is an American movie, Sleepless in Seattle.
Yeah.
There is a radio host called the Dr. Marsha Fieldstone. So the Tom Hanks song is called into that show. We have a lot of that kind of show. On one hand, it didn't give us the opportunity to educate professional audio producers, but on the other hand, it teach the listeners and audience about what is radio program or what is audio. Let people think, only this kind of show is radio program. Radio program is just a long form talk. Just like now in China, I think maybe 99% of Chinese podcasts is a talk show.
Yeah.
Because everyone, not just listeners, is about podcast producers, just think, I have an opportunity to host an audio program.
What's interesting though is when you're driving around in taxis or listening to the radio, the other thing you hear besides call-in radio is you have xiangsheng, and then you have people telling like sangguo stories. Right?
It's a history story.
Which is an interesting, different type of storytelling, which isn't necessarily something you see in the West.
Yeah, last September, The Economist wrote an obituary about a China famous storyteller called Shan Tianfang. Yeah. So that is the show you usually listen on the taxi. So I read that articles about, in the Western view, Shan Tianfang is our storyteller. Because, in my mind, I think Eric Glass is the storyteller. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it is totally different because Shan Tianfang's performance, and that is a performance, it's not a show for radio. It's a performance. It's a live recording.
In a stage in front
Yeah.
of 1,000 people.
Yeah. And that show is talking about the history, the story about Chinese history. So I think it is totally different from the storytelling program we usually listen to, This American Life, the Serial or Startup. But I have an opportunity to listen to This American Life, so I know what is the storytelling in US.
Sure.
But I think for the ordinary people in China, they think 单田芳 is storytelling. So if now I will promote our format of the show. I will tell you this is the 故事讲述 is storytelling. So they have two concepts. First is a bedtime. It's a bedtime story.
Oh.
And another time is it's a 单田芳 did. It's a 相声 or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, I think that is a long way to go for me.
Sure.
People in this society, they listen to that kind of radio show for maybe 10 years, 20 years. It's a long time education for them. So if you want to promote a new format to them, it's a very long way to go.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, but still fascinating stuff though. I don't want to sell it too short. I mean, it's it's like a very old style of storytelling. You can imagine,
Yeah.
Just one person telling like the entire story of Seinfeld. It's sort of like Homer sitting around a campfire, like telling the whole Odyssey. Anyways.
Is this familiar format in the U.S. to talk about the Civil War story or something?
No,
Independent War.
I was thinking about it. There really isn't a good analogy. I used to, as a kid, my parents had these CDs of like Superman in the 1930s. So like really old, like original storytelling on radio had this sort of serial quality. Ones that people remember are all like superheroes, not necessarily, like ancient Greeks and Romans.
But
or, like,
that format
mythology.
is a little bit like the radio play.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it radio play, but like serialized and like goes on for 30 hours.
Okay.
So not just like a condensed like 1 hour thing, but like a something that will last years.
Yeah, because I remember my major in a college is about journalism. I remember there is a very famous radio play in the U.S. in the 1920s. It's called War of Worlds.
War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one, that was I mean, that's like still a classic today.
Yeah.
But that was only like maybe 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
Not something you can like tune into every day driving home. Okay. So all right. So coming back to China in the 2010s, Himalaya. So it founded in 2012, and what was the impact that it's had on the podcast ecosystem or audio ecosystem more generally here in China?
When they launched before, at that time, there is 2 to 3 different kind of audio platform. First is this audio platform. It's totally different from Apple Podcasts because it's not just a distribution. It's more like Podbean, I think, because it's provide a host service, a hosting space for the uploader at beginning.
So just to be clear for people who don't have their own podcasts, the steps that it takes right now for you in the West to publish something on Apple Podcast is like actually really annoying. So first you need to edit it and produce the software. Then you need to find a hosting platform, which generally costs around $10. And after you do that, you have to submit your RSS feed to Apple Podcasts, to Spotify, to Overcast, to all the platforms. So it's actually like a pretty cumbersome process that both costs money and takes 3 to 4 hours and like spending a lot of time reading blog posts about the best way to do it.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is what Himalaya was able to do is make that way more streamlined for the creators out there.
Yeah, because the first version of this business model is every different 2 to 3 audio platform like Himalaya, Lizhi, they provide a free space to upload. So if you upload the show to their server, it's free. It's not cost anything. But the business model is they attract a lot of different people, upload their show into their platform, let the platform become bigger and bigger, the different variety, kind of show on their platform. So they will attract a lot of listeners. So the traffic will be bigger. And the traffic is the business, is the money. So they will use this traffic to attract advertiser to pay. So that is the business model at the beginning. But they find the problem is, they find the problem very quickly because they find audio is just a very small scale market in China. Yeah, people love video. and people love WeChat. The subscription account is a little bit like newsletter. Yeah, so people want to receive the messages quickly, or will spend a long time to entertain. So video is a big choice. Is a good choice, or article is a good choice, but it's not audio. Audio is didn't have their characteristics at that time. So they find their business model is failure. So need to try another one. So they try I remember during the 2014 to 2016. I remember they try a lot of different things, because like they will invite some celebrity to their platform to launch a show, but I still think it doesn't work, because they just only could invite 2 or 3 or 4 celebrities, but that's enough.
Sure.
Yeah. So they think, this does not work. So finally, they find pay for knowledge. So that is maybe the famous business model now in the Western world.
Sure. Pay for knowledge. So
Yeah.
I was at the Beijing train station 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I'm getting off the train, and all of a sudden I see giant posters for an old professor of mine, which happened to be the worst professor I have ever had in China. He fell asleep every single time he had students give a lecture, and he had the gall to after we would clap, he would wake up and then he would ask questions that we had said exactly. We literally said as soon as we were doing the presentations. Anyways, whatever. He's a PKU professor. It's a famous name. He gets to have a show on Himalaya.
Yeah.
So and it's something people pay for. So why don't you talk a little more about what sort of content and what sort of creators are making this pay for knowledge content on sites like Himalaya?
Yeah. So, well, first, the pay for knowledge, I think we need to see it in the 2 different angles. First, is the business model. So this model is a subscription. It's a little bit like, it's like Luminary now doing. So it's just like they need the audience to pay for the content they're listening directly, not through the advertisement to transfer the business value. So this is first. The first angle is the business model way. Another angle is a content. So the content is self-improvement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the most popular topic is like, how to be successful in your workplace, how to build a better communication with your colleague.
Yeah.
Yeah, how to improve your EQ, the emotional EQ.
EQ. Same. It's EQ in English.
Yeah. Okay. So that is the popular shows for pay for knowledge. So that is very specific goal for the show. After 200 episodes, you listen to 200 episodes of the show, maybe you will have...
You'll be rich, you'll be thin, you'll have better sex. Maybe not have better sex. I don't know if we have shows like that. but yeah, the general idea... what's the general background of the creators? I know a handful of them are professors, but what else is the sort of background that makes you successful?
Well, it's a totally different people. Academics is part of that, but like how to improve your EQ is hosted by Cai Kangyong. It's an entertainer. I think how to describe him: host, writer, entertainer. I think
all of the above. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe a male opera. Yeah, and how to build your connection with your colleague is hosted by Ma Dong. Is a host of a debate show.
Okay.
Yeah, so actually they're celebrity. They're not academics. So maybe they will do some research for their topics, but I think their show is not academic way. Their show is, I think it's...
They're very conversational, the ones I've listened to.
Yeah, I think that make the goal very specific.
Yeah.
Than academic show. Because if this show is hosted by a professor, I think I could listen to the opinion will argue like, this professor maybe has this opinion and another one has opinion. So maybe I could learn a lot of different things. But if a celebrity hosts this kind of show, the goal is very specific. Like you just need to know some tips. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
To improve yourself. So I think it's totally different kind of things because Ximalaya, they invited some professor of philosophy to introduce the history of the philosophy in the West.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think that is more like a lecture. I think that is hardcore. But how to improve your EQ is just, I think, maybe just like medication.
Yeah.
Meditation, just like meditation. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about censorship on these platforms. So I remember, I guess a year ago now, I tried to put some of my shows onto Himalaya. I think there was one that said like Trump trade war in the title, and that got taken down pretty fast.
Oh yeah, because they now they have the English sensitive person.
No, I was kind of impressed. I was like, there's someone in English there who's looking at this.
and there is a sentence on their platform is the English work hour is just during weekdays.
Oh Jesus, nice, good for them.
Chinese is every day.
Yeah. No job offer for the
So that's
for the
just
fancy English censors.
Yeah, it's just remind you if your show is updated on Saturday or Sunday, please upload before that.
So they can check you out.
Yeah.
Do you think like the lines of what is acceptable and unacceptable on Himalaya is like basically the same as what you'd see on Weibo or in Weixin, or are there a little bit different standards?
Well, okay. So, I could explain it, but I don't know. Your audience could get, that's your audience could get this point because, well, I think in China, the Himalaya platform, in the government's eyes, is a media. It's even a traditional media.
Interesting.
Yeah, they have used the same way to control Himalaya, same as well as the radio station, the television station, the traditional newspaper. They're not very sensitive about the topics or the shows because Weibo is very sensitive. The WeChat is very sensitive because they are internet company. But Himalaya, in government's eyes, is a media. So they just use the different way to control.
Okay.
So as a media, something like we have in China, in Chinese media, we have a concept called the sensitive period, like the Spring Festival, National Congress, or Tiananmen.
Yeah, we got Guoqin coming up.
Yeah, or the National Day, something. I had this experience that some of my episode of my show will remove, but just during the sensitive period.
Oh, so it's an old show, and it was fine for 6 months, but a big anniversary comes around, and then they take it down.
Yeah. So that reminds me. So that way is a traditional media way, because they just remove your show during the sensitive period, not when you upload.
Sure.
Yeah.
So your sense is for internet company platforms like Jinri Toutiao or like Weixin House or what have you, they are more worried and are more active
because they're 724 censor.
Yeah. Coming now, not necessarily to these pay for knowledge shows, but shows that you in particular enjoy in Mandarin. What would you recommend to the listeners out there to get a sense of what interesting is happening in audio in Chinese?
Okay, so first I have to say this was I usually talk to my Western friend. Pay for knowledge and podcast in China is totally different thing. So if I want to recommend something, is podcast, not pay for knowledge. The most I want to recommend is Gushi FM, Story FM. The New York Times wrote articles about the show because, well, I love storytelling and I love the This American Lifestyle storytelling show. So Gushi FM is familiar with that. Now the Story FM is the one and only show in Chinese to use the way storytelling. So I think this show has this value.
Sure.
So
you're friends with these guys, and you said that you recently sent them This American Life, but this wasn't something they were aware of beforehand. So I'm curious, where was their inspiration from, and what's a little bit? Could you tell a little bit of background about how they're doing what they're doing? Yeah.
Yeah. So Story FM, I think, in my opinion, it's just the score of 80 about This American Life. They just use
like 80% of the way there.
Yeah. Because there is often usually used the way is let the storyteller tell his own stories directly. Yeah, they will cut the voice from the interviewer. Just few voiceover in every stories, because in This American Life, Hourglass is a storyteller. So the Hourglass or the producers will tell this story and use some quote from the
Weave it all together.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. But that show is the most of the part of the show is the storyteller's voice, and there's not the voice from host. So that is different from the Story FM and
So Gusher FM, it's mostly they find different people and they
tell
their own
story,
personal
stories, and the editor will cut their interview, maybe 2-hour interview, into 20 minutes, and let the interviewee tell the story directly.
Sure.
Yeah, as a whole story. So that is the format. It's a little bit different from This American Life, but I think the reason behind that is this show is not weekly. This show is a third time a week. So yeah, they have the pressure about update.
Sure.
So need to find a good way. It's balance, convenience and the quality. So they find this.
What are a few of your favorite episodes?
I remember there is stories from a man living in Shanghai, and now at the present, his experience is just like a failure stories. In the ordinary people's eyes, he is just like a loser, because he lost his wife, he lost his job or house or something. But in the 1990s, he is a doctor, and graduated from a German college. So that episode is tell why he become from a winner to the loser. So that is very interesting, because, that up and downs we usually see in the Chinese society.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we think, it's truly Chinese characteristic style. It's like the life's up and down.
Yeah. But what's interesting is this is very much in contrast to what you see in the sort of like pay for knowledge universe, where it's like, it's lectures by really successful people telling you how to be just as successful as them, as opposed to this sort of thing where you see a much more rounded portrayal of people's lives.
Last October, I traveled to New York and I watched the storytelling show in a bar. And finally, I talked to the director of that show. I asked her why American people love to listen to the story from the ordinary people. Because in China, I think people just love to listen to the story from the successful man, like Jack Ma, Pony Ma, Jack Ma.
Sure.
So, yeah. She tells me that ordinary American people want to learn some experience from the ordinary people, because we're the same. So maybe we have a totally different situation, but your experience, I think maybe we could learn from that. And maybe we'll share the same feeling with you, with your love stories, with your failure, the life or something, maybe with your happiness moment. So I think she tells me the people loves that feeling, and they have opportunity to learn experience from the other people. But in China, I think people just think everyone has a big anxiety, everyone has a big pressure. You think you have a big pressure. I still have a big pressure. So they think, maybe the successful man's story will give me some, truly tips of how to become success.
Sure.
Yeah. So that is a totally different the way to think.
Yeah. I showed up in China in June 2017, not knowing much more than Ni Hao. 2 months later, I was HSK 3.5, confidently having hour-long conversations and traveling alone in rural Yunnan. By the time I started my graduate program that fall, I wasn't the foreigner who forced Chinese groups to switch into English. In my program, there were plenty of students who came to China with no Mandarin background, but none of them got to near the Chinese level I did, largely because they didn't have the right environment to invest in the basics. So where did I make all this critical progress? At CLI in Guilin, one of the few places that teaches Chinese right. In 4 hours of daily one-on-one sessions with engaged and flexible teachers, and in an environment that supports immersion outside the classroom. Unlike in Beijing or Shanghai, you'll be forced to use your Chinese in daily life, and won't fall into a friend group of expats. Guilin isn't your average Chinese small city either. As a tourist hub, it's developed enough to provide you with whatever creature comforts you want, from upscale gyms to chill cafes and fancy malls, all while being surrounded by gorgeous mountains and next to no pollution. CLI isn't just for Mandarin beginners, it supports all levels of learning. It's not just for students either. In fact, its median age is 28. To learn more, go to studycli.org and enter offer code ChinaEconTalk for $100 off.
Support for this week's show comes from Brattle Street Educational Counseling. Stressed out about college applications? Brattle Street Educational Counseling can help. They provide guidance throughout the whole process and offer workshops for students looking to work in small groups at a rigorous pace. The workshops include hours of one-on-one attention, from college essays to standardized test prep to interviewing and applications. Brattle Street offers support for any student. Brattle Street, BRATTLE Street.com, helping you get where you want to go.
So why don't you talk a little bit about your new venture?
First, I want to talk about my first podcast is launched in 2015, but at that time I'm a full-time television editor, so it's just a hobby.
Sure.
Yeah, at that time I first listened to the This American Life. I think, this is truly good format, so I want to learn from that. So I try to find some stories and produce some episodes, but because this is just a part-time job, so and it didn't earn any money. And the biggest problem is no one listened to it because because at that time, the Chinese people didn't know what is the podcast, or they didn't have the habit of the podcast.
Yeah, it's funny because even though it's lots of people in China have Apple phones, and it's a standard app, so it's installed there. It's installed there right away. But when I talk to Chinese people, and I tell them about my show, and I'm like, hey, you should subscribe. And then they're like, what? And I'm like, search 播客 on your phone. And they don't believe me. And then they find it and they're like, oh weird.
Yeah.
What is this purple thing?
Yeah,
I don't know.
So, this logo is podcaster. Yeah, I never use it. Yeah. So at that time, I faced the same situation as you. So I trigger a lot of podcast application in my friend's phone. So at that time, it's very difficult to promote my show because the people didn't have the habits.
Sure.
So I want to talk more. I think Himalaya has do a good thing. Is they teach people how to listen.
Sure.
But then, of course, it's not use the Apple Podcast. It's use their own application. But they educate people have a habit to listening.
Sure. So now it's something you see people listening on the DTL, going to work in the supermarket or whatever. It's like it's a habit now, which is something that it wasn't necessarily in the U.S. 5 years ago, but more and more is becoming one.
Yeah. So last year actually is in the late 2017. So my friend Roland Chen asked me, so do you have some interesting to co-host a podcast show? Because he know I'm doing a podcast before, and I often listen to the podcast. So he was a journalist. So he's saying, maybe we could have our own podcast to invite our friends to chat or talk something. So I think, of course, I want to do this. So, last February, we launched our own Chinese podcast called Left Right. It's a talk show, and the topic is the cultural.
Sure.
But I surprisingly find that the whole environment is changing. The environment of audio is changing now in China because after maybe 6 months, I find we have our basic audience group. I found a lot of friends know I'm doing a podcast. It's totally different from 2015.
Interesting.
Yeah, I could very easily to promote my shows. I just open your Himalaya app and search my shows. So it's very easy to promote. So I think,
so right now, Himalaya, I think it's like 50 million active users and very much concentrated in first and second tier cities.
But self-reported number.
Sure. Well, who knows? Whatever. Lots of people, particularly the wealthier consumers in bigger cities, are users of this app. So anyway, sorry, continue.
No. So my show is growing. I think my show is growing very quickly. So I think, maybe this market in China finally booming now. Because my show is not the first Chinese podcasting. In 2005, we already have the Chinese podcast called Anti-Wave, and the show even won an international award, a podcasting award. But because just few people use this application, during long period, maybe during 2005 to
10 years,
2015. Yeah, 10 years. So there is a lot of show appears, disappear, appear, disappear.
Sure.
Yeah, but now I find maybe the podcast in China is truly booming. So I think maybe we could do this. So my partner created his own company before. He want to copy the Patreon. He want to build a Chinese version of Patreon.
Patreon, yeah.
But it's a failure. Yeah. So at that time he want to launch another startup. So they think maybe audio is a good topic.
Sure.
Yeah. So we think, we could do this. So I think I remember last September he registered another company about audio, and we tried to keep in touch with some brands because first of all I have to say in China just few company or brands know podcast.
Interesting.
Yes, we have a lot of traffic. We have a lot of audience, and even there is a lot of shows like Gush FM, like any other podcast, have a big, bigger and bigger audience than my shows. Sure. But just few shows
in the like hundreds of thousands.
Gush FM has 100,000 subscriber.
Sure.
So I think the play number is bigger than that.
Yeah. So in the US, that would definitely be enough to support a number of people working full time.
Yeah. And I use the mid rolls. Though there is a calendar, not calendar. There's a 计算器怎么说？忘了。
Like a calculator.
Calculator.
Yeah. So just to be clear, so midroll is like in the West, it's a platform.
Advertisement.
It's an advertisement platform. Yeah. So you can say, hey, my show is this big. I do it this many times a week, and it can like estimate how many how much money you'll be able to make.
Yes.
Sorry.
So there is a calculator now on their website, and you could count how big your business value behind your show.
Yeah.
Very easily. So we use this to try to measure how big of my show. I think it's truly a big number, but we have no money. Why?
Yeah.
So I think we think there is some problem behind that. So at that time we tried to keep in touch with some companies, some brands, and educate them that there is a thing called podcast. Himalaya, right? So this is the big audio market behind that. So yeah, maybe you give the opportunity to provide your advertisement to the television, to the video platform, to the WeChat. Maybe you try podcast. Try audio.
Just to be clear, so on Himalaya right now, if you listen to shows, there's barely advertisements within them because the vast majority of money that Himalaya makes is from people paying 100 kwai or whatever to listen to them learning their, how to upgrade their EQ.
That is the big difference between the Chinese audio environment and the Americans audio ecosystem. That is, Himalaya has its own advertising department. So they have an opportunity to, sell their content to the advertiser. Sell my show, sell our shows to the advertiser, but they earn money.
Yeah,
they didn't share the money with the uploader. So that that model is a little bit like YouTube, but it's totally different from the YouTube. The uploader upload their shows to the platform. In YouTube, they will share the money with the uploader and the platform, right?
Yeah.
But in Himalaya, the platform take it all.
100%, really.
Yeah. So for me, they just give me a very bad experience of the show because every audience will listen to maybe 15 seconds clip advertisement before my show.
Yeah.
But that is not my advertisement.
Yeah.
So that's different from the Apple because Apple didn't do any business in the podcast. The advertiser just give the money to the production.
Yeah.
So this is very different. In China, advertiser give the money to the platform, but the platform didn't share the money with the podcaster. So I think maybe we need to build some different model in this environment because the platform just have their own power to promote these things. They just could have an opportunity to touch some brands, but it's just few. There is a lot of different company and brands in China. I think we need to educate them, all of them. Audio is a big market, and audio is the next stop of your promotion.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny that that's the model, like the YouTube model, and basically everyone on YouTube they have a YouTube ad blocker or they skip ads or whatever. But the whole magic of advertising on podcasts is you read the ad yourself, and the host is endorsing it, and they say, "Oh yeah, I use these razors. I I subscribe. I use this website to make my website or what have you." But that's not the value that Himalaya is able to make because they're not working with the creators to make sure that the payho, like the matching isn't right, and the creators aren't bought in to really sell and use their position as a trusted host to sell whatever's being advertised. So anyways, coming back to you and what you're trying to create here in China.
Okay, so at the beginning, my partner and I just want to create a venture is like Gimlet. It's just a podcasting production. But finally, we find, this is not enough because maybe we could produce some good shows, but it didn't earn any money.
Yeah.
So we're trying to find some way to solve this problem. So we started to keep touch with the brands, and we produced the show for the brands. So we built our branded podcast division first. So now we launched two different branded podcasts for two different company, and it will give the cash flow to our company. So I could use this cash to make my own original show better.
Sure.
So that is now at this point, this is my business model. But
so what were the two podcasts?
One is called The Startup Insider. It's presented by GGV. It's a venture capital.
Sure.
Yeah, and they already have
the famous 996
yeah
podcast.
996 yeah, but it's English podcast. We produce the Chinese podcast. It's totally different thing.
Sure.
And another one is called the Bessie's Note. The Bessie is a very famous. I think the leader level person in the Chinese advertisement and the advertisement market. Yeah, it's because she is the former chairman of the WPP China.
You want to say the names of the podcasts in Chinese for our listeners who are interested?
Okay, so the Startup Insider is called 创业内幕. And the Bessie's Note called 备忘录, but the 备忘录 is not the usually Chinese character. The 备 is 宝贝, the 宝贝的贝.
Oh.
Yeah, right. The 望 is the observer, is a watch, the 观察那个看望的望.
So the plan now is to have a handful of branded podcasts, which you're now using for cash flow in order to make more
original podcast.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is my business model now, but we think it's not enough. Of course, it's not enough.
Sure.
Because before my show, there is some famous podcasts before, and they earn some money. But some of the show finally failure because I think there is a reason behind that is that show is just see themselves as a self-media. So they just do the business by themselves, for themselves. So... Well, just for example, there is a brand maybe give the advertisement to the show, but when the show not very popular, the brand remove, and the brand will give the advertisement to another show. So that's totally different from America because in America the company some company has the habit to continue give the advertisement to the different kind of podcast.
Sure.
But in China they just maybe support this show. And when this show not popular, they will remove.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we need to change that situation. We need let the company knows the podcast is the thing you need to support, not just this show or this famous host or this celebrity or something. The whole industry you need to support.
Sure.
You could continue to sponsor every different kind of show. We have this show. You could continuously to do it. So that is what we want to do in the future.
Yeah. So it's a lot of infrastructure that you still need to build out, which is something that the U.S. hasn't really quite solved. But there are a number of different competitors for what we were talking about earlier, like mid-roll, to serve as sort of intermediaries to make the job of finding advertisers much more straightforward, more easily explainable to the head of branding or whatever, as well as making the podcast lives easier, so they don't have to do the conversations that you had to do over and over again, say like explaining what the medium is in the first place.
Yeah, right. So before that, I wrote a newsletter in Chinese about podcasting called JustPod. This newsletter is I just want to give the opportunity to educate. I don't know who will read it, but I want to educate them what is podcasting. I will share some news from the US or the UK and what their podcaster do, what their podcasting company do, and how their business environment see this industry, something like that. So that is the kind of education. And I also co-organize a Podfest China. That is an offline event in China. For the first time, we have a gathering, the podcasting industry, I think, the podcaster, producers, platform, the technical person, something like that. So we would just have a different kind of panel, different kinds of topics to let them gather and talk about only thing, this podcast.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think that is a good way to let the podcaster see, this is not just a part-time or just a hobby. This is a career.
Sure.
Yeah, that's very important because in China we didn't have NPR, we didn't have Gimlet before, so many people don't think it is an industry. They just think, it's just something for fun. Yeah. Weekday, the weekend afternoon, we could invite my friend to chat something for 1 hour, and I recorded it to upload into the platform. That's all. So they don't think, that is the thing. But now I think we need to tell them it is the thing. You could do this. You could do this seriously.
Yeah.
Because that will become the business value behind that. Maybe now you could earn money now, but in the future, maybe 6 months later or 1 year later, you could use your podcast to earn money, and then that will inspire you to improve your quality of the show. That's very important because now in China, a lot of, I talked before, 99% podcasting, I think it is a talk show.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe 99% of podcasting is amateur production.
Yeah.
People just use their part-time to produce their show. So I think we need to change. We need to see the podcast as a full-time job, like me do. I quit my full-time job in television station to get my full-time job in podcasting. So I think we need this kind of change in China.
Yang Yi, best of luck, and thanks so much for being a part of China Econ Talk.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
China Econ Talk is edited by Jason McRonald and Kaiser Guo and is a proud member of the Sinica Network from SUP China. For other great shows on China, check out the Caixin Sinica Business Brief, the Pan Daily Tech Buzz China, the New Voices Podcast, and of course, the Sinica Podcast, now in its 9th year. Until next week.